This is an introductory video on the ethics of Friedrich Nietzsche. You can see the dates that he lived there, 1844 to 1900. And we're going to look at primarily his ethics, but especially how it relates to religion. And in the 1800s, Nietzsche is one of four very influential secular thinkers. And so these four individuals are extremely important for understanding what's going on in the 20th century and, of course, into the 21st century. And many of the intellectual developments then that was going on in the 20th century have been an extension of, or in some cases, a reaction to Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, Nietzsche, and Charles Darwin, all of them being very influential in their various ways. So especially these people have been influential in their contribution to the intellectual integrity of atheism in various sorts of ways. So I want to briefly talk about those four, and then we'll get to Nietzsche. So on those four contemporaries, you can see the dates there for Karl Marx, obviously familiar with the phrase Marxism from his name. He's the one who famously said religion is the opiate of the masses. And his idea is that religion is a myth. It's made up by those people who are in power, that is, those people who control the money in society. And it was made up in order to control the lower classes. So everything is about economics, including religion for Marx. Freud was a psychologist, of course, and his idea is that God is a subconsciously created father figure that we just make up in order to fill the gaps for the failures and weaknesses, absences of our actual fathers, who are, of course, imperfect. And for Freud, religion can be explained fully by psychoanalysis and psychology. So we have economics, we have psychology, and then we have science and biology with Darwin. Now, Darwin wasn't himself a robust atheist who's out there to support atheism, but as many of his followers were, like Huxley. And Darwin's famous work on the origin of species from 1859, extremely influential. So the basic idea, of course, with his introduction of evolution is that humans are the result of chance, of natural selection over long periods of time. And basically humans are only different from other animals by our complexity. So we are completely products of nature. There's really no reason to postulate a creator or a God. Everything can be explained through science. And so that is a tool for atheism through the 20th and 21st century. Okay, now let's go to Nietzsche. One of the most famous phrases from Nietzsche is "God is dead." Of course, he has numerous phrases that are especially important. We'll highlight a couple more here. I'm getting most of this material from his two books, The Genealogy of Morals and Beyond Good and Evil. And primarily, the big picture message is that God's no longer taken seriously in Western culture. So we're at a stage in history, says Nietzsche, where, beyond the medieval period where everything was about God, now God's not really taken that seriously. He's not really a factor to be concerned in the way that we live our lives. Now, after he said that, he said, well, maybe I've come before my time, and he viewed himself as being prophetic, that this is going to be the case. God is going to play a lesser and lesser role in our culture, and he was certainly right about that. Now, the assumption, of course, is that God was a myth that humans created. There really isn't a God, something that we just come up with. So his view on life. Life is essentially exploitative. So for Nietzsche, Life itself is corrupt. It involves injury, right? There are predators and there are prey. And life is about suppression, the strong taking advantage of the weak, and the strong exploit the weak. And that's just the way it is. You see it in nature, but it's also true among humans. So life is, another famous phrase of his, the will to power. We have a desire to have control over other people, to exert our power over others, and that's what life is about. Exploitation belongs to the nature of society, and in fact, you really don't have society without there being exploitation. You just can't get away from exploitation. For Nietzsche, aristocracy, as he might use the term, those who have power and wealth, conceives itself as justifying its own existence and views the lower classes as there just to be used by the aristocracy for their own gain. There's these division of classes, of course, and that's natural. That's just the way it is. Now, when it comes to values and morality in more detail here, values are not found in nature at all, nor are they found in God. Humans create our own values. What we say is right is right. What we say is good is good. And Nietzsche was very fond of the ancient Greek philosophers, and Protagoras is one that is very influential, who said humans are the measure of all things. We are what decide, or who decide what's good and bad. We do, right? We decide that, and then we go on from there. I mean, where else could you start but with humans making these proclamations? So Nietzsche gives an account of the development of morality, and he has this idea of a master morality and a slave morality. And those ideas we can explore a little further with a chart here. So we have master morality on the left and slave morality on the right, and he differentiates these two. Master morality takes good as the fundamental moral idea. So there is obviously an ethics here, a morality for Nietzsche. On the other hand, slave morality takes evil as the fundamental moral idea. And so for master morality, since we have good as the fundamental moral idea, that's what refers to aristocracy. Those in that class are good, but good, according to slave morality, sorry about the typo there, refers to the oppressed people and the weak people. So bad, then, is the contrast for master morality to good, and that refers to the vulgar, the inferior beings, the people to exploit. For slave morality, evil refers to the people who are powerful, the ones who are exploiting them. So note this contrast here. For slave morality, we have evil being a central idea, but master morality doesn't even have that concept. It's just good and bad. So master morality refers to himself as the one who determines value, right? Humans are the measure of all things. For slave morality, they have to appeal to some standard beyond humans, like God, religion of some kind, that determines good and evil. So for master morality, then the values are honor, creativity, progress. Those are the things that are important. For slave morality, of course, the ones being exploited, they're the ones who value sympathy and humility and patience, right? So we have this distinction in how we approach morality according to our mindset, whether we have the mindset of the predator or the mindset of the prey, right? The master or the slave. So a little bit more on terminology here to clarify. So we have these terms that we just mentioned: good, bad, evil. These terms originated in reference to people or classes, right? Not in reference to actions of individuals. So things like right or wrong aren't really that important. Rather, the moral concepts of good, bad, and evil are what are important. And good then is ultimately linked with power, people who have power. Humans are a mere step in the evolutionary process, though. So Nietzsche kind of recognizes this. Look, it just happens to be that humans are at the top of the chain now, but we're just a step. We're in the process of evolving into Übermensch, right? So Übermensch is the German there. It could be translated Superman, as it is sometimes, over humans, right? Hyper humans, some people might say. And those, there are a few of those who exist even now, according to Nietzsche. Presumably, he considered himself to be one. Also, Wagner, the musician, at least for a time, or as we say in Midwestern United States, Wagner, there are a few of these people who are superhuman, right? And this is a process where those are just developing. Now, one way to describe his morality is to say that he takes a pretty tough stance, right? Humility, piety, these things, submission, these are hindrances to progress. These things are Christian values, maybe, but they're actually hindrances to progress. And so he says, the weak and the failures shall perish, and they ought even to be helped to perish. So, you know, that's a pretty tough stance there. Don't help the weak and the failure, just let them die, let them get out of the way so progress can occur, right? Sheep, the ones being exploited, of course, are scared of the wolves, and they call them evil, but the wolves, they kind of like the sheep. I mean, sheep taste good, for example. I mean, why not? They're there to help serve the aristocracy, right? So his approach is, here's the facts. This is the way the world is. By nature, everything is exploitative. So are humans. Deal with it or die. Now, that kind of approach to life sounds like it might be a motivation for Germans after the time of Nietzsche, right? So the Nazis actually took some of Nietzsche's works and, with a little modification, used them to support their movement. So is Nietzsche a supporter of Nazism? Well, I mean, the straight answer is no. He definitely was not. I mean, for one thing, he died long before Nazism developed. But for another thing, he would have rejected this kind of populist movement, this national movement. Now, Nietzsche's sister, Elizabeth Forster Nietzsche, revised much of his work, and that was used, like I mentioned, for propaganda for the Nazis. So they did fall on his work. There were the seeds there, some of the ideas there of exploitation, the weak getting out of the way, helping the weak to die, right? That's very easy for the Nazis to use. Now, Nietzsche thought the Übermensch was above the lowly political scene, right? That it was accepted by the masses. So he wouldn't be a nationalist. He was much more individualistic in his emphasis. So while his works and some of the things that he said may have been used by the Nazis for their propaganda, I don't think Nietzsche himself would have gone along with that at all. Now, what did Nietzsche think of himself and his role in history? Well, he suggested that chairs of philosophy might one day be devoted to the interpretation of his works. And he had chapter headings in some of his books, such as Why I Write Such Good Books and Why I Am So Wise. Not the kind of chapter headings people normally would include, although a lot of people may think such things and may provide evidence for such things. They don't come right out and say it like Nietzsche did, right? So it is true. People certainly write dissertations about Nietzsche. People write books about Nietzsche. People write articles, hundreds of articles about his work. Now, I don't know of any chairs devoted to his works, but you know, I'm not familiar with all the chairs across the world, so maybe there are some. Maybe if one of you knows, leave a comment as such. But I don't think there are. Toward the end of his life, he did suffer from mental illness. He did not live very long, as we saw with the dates, and so he didn't die well, I guess you might say, unlike his vision of the Übermensch.